Hi everyone, and welcome to the Managing Your Team in the Uncertain Times Ahead webinar. Just while we wait for a few more people to join, I'm just going to launch a quick poll, which have a couple of questions which will be pretty interesting given today's topic. So just take, if you can, a few seconds to answer those, and we'll give the poll results out as we go along. Great. Well, we'll get started now, and thanks so much for your time today. Really thrilled to be joined by Jason Ennor. He's the CEO and co-founder of MyHR. Hi, Jason.
Hey, mate. How are you going?
Very well, thanks. And for anyone not familiar with MyHR, they're actually, I think, the third or fourth largest HR department in New Zealand, and they're actually they're basically an outsourced HR provider, and they mix innovative software with dedicated HR teams to service your business. And I think you were telling me earlier, Jason, that you look after about 17,000 individual employees in New Zealand.
Yeah, we look at our clients are the business, so we've got over 800 Kiwi businesses, ranging from as small as 1 employee to as large as about 700. So there's a real spread there. And those clients collectively employ, around 17,000 Kiwi workers for whom we manage and look after all their HR needs. So, yeah.
So definitely at the forefront of, given the whole, just the unprecedented sort of COVID situation. And I don't think even that the 2008 GFC was anything like what we're seeing today. Businesses back then at least could still trade. A lot of businesses, in this current situation, are unable to trade. They're unable to even have customers maybe come within their premises. So really an unusual time, especially from the employment side of things.
Oh, totally right. Yeah, I don't think this is anything like the GFC. That it's possibly for those who lived through Christchurch. There are maybe some parallels in terms of business closures, but even then, there's just been nothing like this, certainly in our history or lifetime, and we're under the pump. I mean, to give you some real life stats from our workflow point of view, we would, in our 7 years of operation, our busiest month for restructure was 60 restructures in 1 month. At the moment, we're running at about 276, and I believe that will go up to maybe double that. Meanwhile, in our busiest week, or probably an average week, we would produce about 350 employment agreements for new employees starting work with our clients. Last week we did 12. So that gives you an indication of where our workload has skewed massively away from helping our clients hire new people and produce new employment agreements to restructure and redundancy. It's a pretty staggering swing if you look at it like that.
Well, I think, there's just that massive uncertainty for so many businesses of revenues, future revenues, and as a result, their hiring aspirations have come to a pretty screeching halt.
Indeed. Yeah, totally, mate. That's it.
And one of the questions I wanted to ask on the poll was, is there anything that you specifically, and I'm talking to our viewers, think that, the government or sort of business groups could be doing to help small businesses? Unfortunately, the poll only allowed sort of yes, no answers. So if you'd like to, if you have some thoughts, do put it into the Q&A comments. And obviously, if you have questions as we do go along, please keep them coming. We'll do our best to answer them as we go. The format for today, we've chosen sort of 5 key, I suppose, elements of sort of the HR side of things. And so we'll take you through those, and then we've actually got a range of questions that you have sent in to us, and so we'll address those at the end. And as I said, any questions as we go, please do put them into the comment box, and we'll address them.
Great.
Oh, sorry, that's my vote. Great. So I think let's get started on the first topic, Jason, and I suppose we know that we are obviously in level 3 now, but there's uncertainty. We all hope we're going to go to level 2, but equally, we don't know the future, and we may end up back at a stricter lockdown perspective. So I think you were sort of wanting to talk about, you know, given the uncertainty, what one can do on a temporary basis versus a more permanent basis.
Yeah, and I've chosen this topic to lead with because it's sort of the umbrella decision that affects how you consult, the pace of your consultation, and the type of change you're making. And there's a little bit of confusion at this level, and I think the confusion has resulted in some press about you know, unions and other groups calling out employers for maybe not doing the right thing, frustration from employers trying to engage their employees properly, and these are really, I mean, change in the employment relationship is change, right? And if you're changing the written terms that are reflected in the employment agreement, some consultation is needed. But the uniqueness of the COVID situation has allowed us to do some things on a temporary basis. And if you look at the employment.gov website, which is the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment's website, they also talk about perhaps shorter consultation timeframes, you know, due to the COVID situation. But they are really at pains to point out that you cannot shortcut basic principles of employment law, or any principles of employment law. You know, consultation is required. Good faith must be adhered to, and the laws around making changes need to be maintained. So the reason I differentiate between a temporary change and a permanent change is permanent changes are no different under COVID as to any other time. And so a permanent change is when I go to my employees and I say, we have a team of 10 and I can only afford to hire, to carry on paying for 5. We're doing a restructure and therefore 5 people may be made redundant. 5 people will keep their jobs or be redeployed into new jobs. But before we make that decision, here is a consultation process. That process is pretty well defined in law, and any one of the viewers or anybody who's been through a restructure on either side of the table understands this process. That is the same in COVID as it was before COVID. You know, you have to consult properly and allow people all their normal rights to representation, rights to present a response, etc. Any changes that you make as a result of that permanent consultation process then must be reflected in writing and agreed. And if they're not agreed, then redundancy is an outcome that also then needs to be considered. In contrast, a temporary change, which is what we're seeing with a lot of our clients, they're saying, okay, we've had this big hit, we're shut, we can't work, we've got the wage subsidy. So despite the fact we've seen a 90% or more drop in revenue, we see a point where there is a recovery. And what we don't want to do is lay off 90% of our team. What we want to do is kind of prep for that point of recovery, which is great. And it's a good position for the business to be in. And it's the whole point of the wage subsidy. So we're seeing, for example, manufacturers that are able to do this. They're going, well, I can't make anything, the factory's shut, but it will reopen in hopefully middle of May, and we will start producing again. If they go and lay off all their staff to bridge a shortfall in revenue, they're going to have to re-recruit. So a temporary change is one in which you go to your team and you go, hey guys, I can't send you to work because the government won't let me. If I could, I would, but I do have this wage subsidy. And so what I am proposing to do is that you don't have to attend work for this period of time because you're unable to. Instead of receiving pay, you will receive the wage subsidy of $580 per week or $350 per week if you're part-time, and you'll be at home. Or it might be that you are required to work, say, 80% of your normal hours for the period of the lockdown, and that 80% of normal hours will be paid for in part from the wage subsidy and in part from business cash flow. But we're making a change that directly relates to lockdown. And what we make really clear when we do consultation documents and outcome documents is that your permanent terms of employment as reflected in your signed employment agreement remain unchanged. That this is a temporary measure to get through lockdown. And so when it's a temporary change like this, we're not putting redundancy on the table because we don't want to make people redundant. We're not updating the employment agreement as such. We have this letter that serves as a temporary adjustment on those specific terms. We have a timeline for recovery, and the consultation time frame is reduced. You know, we're kind of looking at a 24-hour cycle because that's the pace at which things are happening. So in normal circumstances, to propose that you reduce somebody's hours by 20%, or to propose that you cut pay effectively from, whatever it was, all the way down to $580 per week, that would require a pretty serious amount of consultation and potentially redundancy if the employee didn't want to accept it. Because we're talking about a temporary change related to COVID, what we can do is make a sort of speedy decision, get it out to the employees, engage them in a really transparent way, but within 24 hours be making changes. And provided you're passing on the wage subsidy and you're meeting the requirements of the Ministry of Social Development there, and provided the changes are not some way of permanently disadvantaging your team, that can happen a lot faster. So that's why I sort of like to differentiate, because we will hear from businesses saying, well, my employees are questioning why they have to go, take a 20% pay cut, or why can't they, get their full pay, or whatever it may be. And what we're saying is, just be aware that this relates to COVID. The alternative is businesses sort of shut their doors and start making people redundant, which is what the government and the wage subsidy are all designed to kind of to prevent. So they're quite different things, and I guess I don't want to get so legally technical that it kind of blinds people, but if you need to make a permanent reduction to your team or a permanent change to working conditions, and therefore update the employment agreement, don't go looking for shortcuts under COVID, because you'll get tripped up. It requires the old way of the full consultation process. But if you're looking at a recovery plan, and all you need is for a period of, say, 4, 8, or 12 weeks to reduce the company overhead, to make use of the wage subsidy, to make use of some of the bank loan or government loans, and get your business through on a reduced overhead basis, and then bounce back when the economy lifts, then that's in the category of temporary change. Those things can happen a bit faster.
And one of the things I think we're probably all aware of in terms of large news stories was in New Zealand, who are obviously under the pump, and they were talking about reducing their workforce by a third. Yes. And what I'm dialing down here is on that consultation process, they said, and look, we can't do it in person, so we will do it over a video chat. Mm-hmm. And obviously the unions got pretty upset because they thought it was impersonal, and it didn't give the employees the right opportunities to sort of maybe to question and respond. Can you just speak to maybe some tips or advice on how to sort of handle that process, given that a lot of businesses won't be able to maybe have that direct face-to-face contact?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd certainly recommend wherever possible to do it through some sort of video chat. Some kind of face-to-face connection does help. So, and this doesn't have to be costly. There are enterprise software solutions that have video chat, but most of the cloud-based services like Zoom and Google and Skype have a free version that you can use. So I think using video conferencing tools, if you can, should be part of that suite of tools that you use when consulting. It is legal to do it this way. So people worry that they can't, that they have to meet face-to-face. It's preferable to meet face-to-face, and that's sort of what the unions are saying around getting around a table, but we simply can't. That's against the law. You would see Greg Ferran and his HR team being potentially arrested for doing that. So there is you're weighing what the needs are in two potentially competing pieces of legislation. So employment law is saying, well, it's better if you can get face-to-face, but COVID lockdown regulations and laws say you're not allowed. So this wins, right? So it doesn't mean you don't consult, but what it means is you just don't get into the room. So video conferencing, if at all possible. I think also allowing extra time for that response to come in. So when you're making these permanent changes, we'll often say, well, we're restructuring the business or proposing to restructure the business. Here are the changes, and you've got maybe 48 hours to seek advice or get representation and respond. Sometimes that response window is a week if you have the luxury of time and you have a lot of people to consult. I would suggest if you can extend your consultation timeframe by at least 50%, so maybe 2 days becomes 3 days, a week becomes a week and a half, sort of thing. It allows people to kind of collect the info they need. It might be a bit harder to get to a lawyer because you can't, knock on their door or go see them. And also allow written responses. So an employee might want to go, well, okay, I've thought about everything. I've kind of written it down. Can I just send you my 1 page of notes or my 2 pages of notes? And then when we have the video conference, we can read them together and you can hear from me about what I think. And their union or their lawyer may want to do that. So if you are allowing additional time for consultation, if you're making use of video conferencing, and if you're allowing, a bit of flexibility in the way people respond, like submitting a written reply, then that's all fine. It's procedurally okay. You would not find, in my view, and this I guess remains to be seen if someone wants to test it in the Employment Relations Authority, but you'd not, in my view, find a case where a restructure was found to be unfair on the basis of video conferencing consultation, because it's an absolute reality of what we have to do. And look, let's be honest, pre-COVID, these sorts of things did happen from time to time. If people were in, a head office was in one location and they had a satellite office down the line, often they start consultation through video chat anyway. So
yeah,
it's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, it's needs must, and I think we all need to adjust with the times and kind of possibly the new normal. And the new normal, while we sort of we talk about the sort of the new reality, the reality really is that it's very uncertain what the environment, business environment for a particular company is going to look like sort of 2, 3, 5, 6 months down the track. So in terms of how does one plan ahead when you're very uncertain about what your future is going to look like? The old forecasting models that you probably have done are out the window. How does one, from the labour perspective, look after that?
Yeah, totally. And this is now really moving into that recovery phase. And I talk normally when I do these sorts of sessions outside of a COVID world about effective labour planning. And I never like to talk to a business advisory or accountancy-based audience. I never like to sort of appear like I'm teaching them to suck eggs in terms of overall business planning. But what I always implore people to do is when you engage in labour planning, so labour planning is the process of planning the humans I need to run my business, and then the mix of those humans in terms of casual, full-time, part-time, contractor. And there's a numbers exercise that says, okay, at this level of revenue with this many customers, I need this many staff to service it. And so you can translate that to a hiring plan and maybe a wage budget and wage forecasting. But what often misses in a labour plan is then the types of roles you need as you grow. So for every maybe 10 people I hire in my operation, I need an additional supervisor or manager. And so am I factoring that in? And it's not just the cost of that person, it's the capability of that person. Where am I getting a person who can lead a team of 5 or 10 people who will carry on the kind of values of my business? If my labour plan is linked to a business strategy that's around run and maintain, and I only have 15 staff and that's all it's going to be, it's then about bolstering that team, making sure that they can run things effectively and limiting turnover. So those key principles around labour planning don't really change in the COVID situation. They're just against a backdrop of a really unique time. But what a great opportunity to maybe reset your business if you can. So there's I think right at the start of this, the Reserve Bank governor categorized businesses as those who will thrive, those who will survive, and those who will go to the wall. And that might sound a bit harsh, but it's a pretty sort of clear category. And the thriving businesses are those who really haven't seen an effect of COVID, and in some cases have seen an uplift in business because they do something that is an essential service right now. And their business might have traded at this level, and during COVID, they're up here. And post-COVID, they're expecting to come back a bit. But if they're smart, they won't come back to pre-COVID levels. They'll have seen a permanent uptick in their business and their revenue. So that category is really a sort of business as usual group. The survivors are the ones that I'm most interested in, because these are the companies that might have 50 staff today and be going down to say 10, even to 5, but intend to survive and then build their way back up. And this is where the labour planning piece is really critical. So, plan those reductions, which we talk about in a moment. But when you're planning the growth and the rebuild back up, what sort of people do you need to help the business grow? What do you need absolutely right now as a bare minimum to keep this thing alive? And what are you going to need in this new plan? So don't just do a numbers on page exercise. There is obviously a commercial reality. If you have lost 50% of your revenue, and there may be a corresponding need to drop 50% of costs or thereabouts. But don't just run numbers on that basis. Look at the the type of people or type of person or type of role you need to fulfill a strategy. And then bolster yourself and prep yourself to be best able to do that and to get access to those resources when you grow. So the labour planning exercise that I talk about is really all around including more than just a numbers kind of calculation. How many can I afford and what do I need? And again, it depends a lot on your type of business, professional services versus say retail versus manufacturing. And in some places, there are just core jobs that are needed to make the machines run, to make the business operate, to serve the customer. But yeah, I really encourage people to be creative. And one of the topics coming up, you know, some of the alternatives we consider is where can you use contractors? How might a sort of supplementary casual workforce come in and help you out? What as business owners and founders can we do? You know, I'm finding myself included and everyone I'm talking to, everyone's sort of back on the tools in some way and kind of doing things that they've maybe left behind as their business has grown. It's a great opportunity to get in and really assess the good parts of your company and the parts that aren't really working and the parts that need to be tweaked and changed. And so build your labour plan into your company strategy. You know, from a revenue uncertainty point of view, it's about assessing where that future revenue is going to come from. And if it's from different streams to where it's previously come from, then that will help inform the type of person you need to go after those new revenue streams. And that type of person may not be in your business currently, which will inform some of your restructure decision making, but start you thinking about how you set up for the new types of jobs you need in your company.
It's interesting, you know, given that probably a lot of companies will have had to shed staff, and then so the labour pool in some specific areas may be larger. Maybe, you know, because I know there's been a lot of, you know, we've had very low unemployment, so there might be an opportunity to get into your business people that previously, you know, were either at full employment or sort of went elsewhere. So in some ways, if you do have the planning in mind and you know who you're after, it could be there could be some upside because people will be very keen to get back to working.
Yeah, mate. There's definitely we are all expecting there to be downward pressure on salaries and wages in some areas and even some high skilled areas. So that means being able to access talent for perhaps less than you previously could, and a higher level of availability for this key talent. So some hard to fill areas, you know, you may find that there are more people available. What I would caution though is, I think it's fine to go deal hunting, but be very careful when you're dealing with humans about really just trying to undercut somebody. You know, it might be okay to do a real estate deal on that basis because it's a one-off transaction. But if we look at some of the hard to fill roles pre-COVID, software developers and salespeople were two that most commonly came up for us. And a good salesperson, a good software developer used to be able to command quite high dollars. That might have to come back a little bit. Software we will see because, you know, remote workforce, cloud-based working, they're likely to still be in some demand, but some of that will come off. Maybe in the area of marketing and events too, there will be a lot of people in the market. So you might be able to negotiate a better sort of salary or more flexible terms. But if you're going to be really ruthless about it and completely undercut them and go, well, look, I'll offer you 50% of what you previously would have earned because I think I can get away with it. It's a very short-term strategy. When the economy starts to pick up again, and it will, they're the first people you're going to lose, right?
Well, I was about to say, you're not really, your relationship is immediately on a fairly adversarial basis. So
Totally.
sort of expecting, you know, if you're going to then invest the time and resources into training them up or sort of getting them to know about your business,
Yeah.
you know, and then as you say, they're the first people, you know, because they feel aggrieved to then leave. It's sort of a shooting yourself in the foot.
Totally. Once you start commoditizing labor to that extent, it is a really short-term strategy because people have no loyalty to you at that point, you know. So take the chance to, you know, hunt for good people because there should be more available. But when you get them, you know, look after them. And for me, the idea around deal making at this time is it's a discussion about mutual benefit with a plan to kind of get you back. So if you sit down with a person who previously might have commanded a $150,000 salary and you're saying, you're the person we need, you know, you're part of our recovery plan, but there is no way I can afford 150K right now. In fact, I'm maxed out at 90. And I get that that sounds really low, but here's my plan for recovery, and here's where I'm at, and I'd like you to be there, and let's sort of see if we can get you to a point where there is we recover your earnings at the same time as we recover our company earnings. And so if you're pitching a lowball offer, it's on the basis of some really transparent kind of business discussions. And maybe we offset that with, why don't you do 4 days a week as well? So there's you have a bit of a lifestyle as well as that reflects the reduced income. And you help me bring this business back. I help get you back to your earnings. Perhaps income is supplemented by some sort of profit share. If you help us recover and there's profit in the business, maybe on a quarterly basis, we can kind of give you a 5K bonus or whatever it is. And be transparent about that. I think just the hard case low ball offers are really short term. And it's not just at that sort of 150K level, it's across the board. You're going, well, previously in my shop or previously in my factory or my warehouse, I'd pay people $20 to $22 an hour because I like to pay above the minimum wage. I've got a good culture. I've got a good crew. They work well together. They're incredibly productive. And the whole vibe just works. To then go out and go, I'm going to just slash everyone to the minimum wage and I'm just going hard on the kind of low cost employment, but the same thing happens. The same level of loyalty and disengagement occurs, And yeah. I'm not dismissing the ability to afford it. I get businesses are hurting, mate. As you heard from those restructure stats, we're at the front line of this pain. What I'm saying is go looking for deals by all means, but don't abandon your principles of good employment. And don't just try and kind of make some, cut to the bone, lowball offers, because I think that will bite you when you come and recover and grow again.
I think that's really good advice. And it does actually bring us on to sort of the more difficult question, which a lot of businesses are facing, which is, okay, if I do have to make redundancies, what should I be considering? And to your point, how do I make it be as empathetic as possible during this process?
Yeah. So there's a few things around when to consider redundancies, and again, COVID is unique, but the decision making around this and the process related to it is not so unique. So you need to consider redundancies when you absolutely have no other alternative. That's the kind of headline there. It's not something I ever advise people to tinker with. And there was a practice with some large Kiwi employers for a while. Some early 2000s, I noticed this a lot actually, and people could probably think of a few, and I'm not going to name names, but mostly private sector, a couple of public sector, maybe some local councils in there, who had a practice of kind of being perpetually in restructure. And if you knew anybody that worked there, you're like, oh, hey man, how you going? How's the job? And they'd be like, oh yeah, I've got my letter again. We're going through another restructure. And it's ridiculously unsettling, and it's a very strange way to sort of run a business. So when you need to make your redundancies, or you consider your redundancies when you absolutely have no other option. And my advice is you do it once and you do it right. So you sit down and you think about everything you need at this time and where any surplus exists. And so some of those decisions are really clear. There's no, the science behind it is quite simple. We cannot afford to pay you anymore. We do not have the level of business or clients or product orders or whatever it is to service this client, this employee base. So we have to make some people redundant because of the two most, the two fundamental reasons. One, money to pay you, and two, work to give you. So that's that piece. But within that will be some of the more strategic decisions that I was talking about earlier. What makeup do I need of workforce? Do I, the opportunity to take a bit of a fresh look at your company and align what you want to be to align your staff structures to what you want to be. So when I talk about and advise clients on restructures that may lead to redundancies, but also changes in jobs, I make sure they adopt an approach of your strategy informs the work that is needed, which then defines the jobs you need. So that is your restructure. And so that's the order you do it. You start with your big picture. What do we need? What do we absolutely need for our future strategy? Where are we going? Our recovery plan for the next 3 months, our plan for the next year, and then our plan for the 5 years thereafter. And if you have a picture of what that strategy looks like, and you're pretty clear what your business needs to be doing, the work you need to do then falls out of that naturally. We need these sorts of tasks to be completed. And those tasks can then get allocated into roles, and you can very quickly see what jobs you need and what jobs you don't need. And so some of the redundancies may be in the category of they're the people we just can no longer afford. We need less of them. Some of the redundancies may be jobs that are genuinely surplus now, and that you don't need a job like that to service your new normal, to your earlier point. And if you can do it completely like that, it is much more effective than doing a couple of redundancies now and a couple more next month and then a couple more the month after that. It's a very unsettling time for people. And if employees are constantly looking over their shoulder going, am I going to be laid off? When's my letter coming? Where am I at? It doesn't help recovery.
And can you just link it back to, in terms of the wage subsidies, can you just remind me, so if you as a business have taken the wage subsidies, then part of that is an undertaking that you then won't make a redundancy. Is that correct? Or
there's two categories. So the way this works is if you applied for the wage subsidy before 4 p.m. on the 27th of March, your obligation is to undertake continued employment on a best endeavours basis. So, you need to demonstrate that you've done everything you can to keep everybody employed. And if you haven't been able to, despite everything you've done, you have not been able to retain them, you can commence redundancies. So that's the first category. The category after that, if you applied after 4 p.m. on the 27th of March, you're prohibited from making people redundant during the wage subsidy period, because you are allowed to pass on the subsidy only. So the MSD are effectively saying, well, you don't have to carry any overhead for these people, you just pass on the subsidy and that's okay, which is not entirely true because they're of course accruing leave. And if you make them redundant in the future, you'll have a notice period to pay out. So you still do retain some overhead. So the government haven't quite got that right. But you've got an obligation to keep them if you've collected the wage subsidy. However, if you can't, there is, if you look at the MSD website, it says if you do let people go, you must notify MSD, and they may require you to return the money that you have, that they have paid you for this. So we would assume that's the balance of the money that is owed to that employee. So you don't get to lay them off and then keep that money. So you can still make people redundant if you're in the post 27th of March category. You just have to be careful about how you do it. And in reality, what we're finding with most clients is they're not. They're just waiting, because employees are also pushing back and saying, well, don't let me go. Please just let me stay until the end of the 12 weeks because I can get $580 a week. And if you lay me off today, I'm not going to get another job anywhere in a great hurry. And my only options for income are to look at the dole. And so there's pushback from employees as well.
And in the meantime, potentially things may change a little bit, and the horizon may look a little bit less gloomy, and maybe there are options on the table that weren't sort of 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Correct. Yeah, and we are, and that's the intention of the subsidy scheme, to keep people employed in the hope that they can, the business can recover. And look, I don't want to politicise the issue, because this is, it doesn't really matter. It is what it is. But this is one area where the government will need to be a little careful, because potentially the subsidy has just moved the redundancy impact by providing the subsidy. So there are certainly plenty of employers who are aware that come the time that the wage subsidy runs out, they're going to need to lay off the staff. And we saw that. We saw a commencement of restructures in the early days that were then immediately put on hold when the subsidy rules changed. So you might remember the first wave of the wage subsidy was capped at 150K, and you had to top up to 80%. They removed the cap and they removed the requirement to top up to 80% and allowed employers to pass on the subsidy only. So that saw a whole lot of restructures stop, but I think certainly many will come back online.
Mm. And then alternatives. I think, and we have slightly touched on this as well, but I mean, it doesn't always have to be alternatives. You could furlough people, maybe they could take their annual leave sort of early, or they could take unpaid leave. There are options, aren't there?
Yeah, totally. And often these apply to some of the, say, smaller or medium-sized businesses where they really would like to keep everybody because they don't have a big team. So cutting 2 people is 10 or 20% of your total workforce. It has a significant impact. And the opportunity to maybe shed some underperforming employees is part of this process, even though, let me qualify, redundancies are for commercial reasons only and not performance reasons. But, the reality is when a business is downsizing and the jobs are confirmed as going, and you make selections around who will stay and who will not, performance is part of that objective criteria. But companies that are able to do that sort of downsizing and changing, that's fairly clear cut. Businesses that don't want to see people go, that's really what this headline talked about, is what are the alternatives to kind of laying off half my team? Because I kind of think by December we might see work starting to pick up again. So alternatives could be anything like a company-wide reduction in hours. So everybody goes part-time. So it needs to be consultation now, because this is the category of a permanent or sort of semi-permanent change. It runs post-COVID and post the wage subsidy. And it needs to be considered in terms of people's lifestyle. Can they afford to go part-time or not? Will they be able to meet their mortgage repayments, etc.? Can we put some people, we complete a redundancy process but stay in touch through a contractor relationship, and we contract them in as we need them in the hope that eventually, if there's a permanent work stream, we can return them to full-time employment. A collective agreement to reduce salaries by a set percentage, that kind of thing. Consultation is still required in this case, but these can all be presented as an alternative to redundancy. If people say, well, look, I don't want to be part of the job market, I'd rather take a 20 or a 30% cut in my pay, or I'd rather do a 4-day week or a 3-day week for the next 6 months or year to retain my job and work with this awesome team, with an understanding that, at some point, maybe December, maybe February, maybe a year away, but at some point in the kind of foreseeable future, I'm returning to my old terms. That's what I mean by alternatives to redundancy. Things you can do creatively that keep all of your people connected to your business whilst meeting your requirements to reduce overhead.
And I think that probably would give greater flexibility for the business as well, in terms of future planning, hopefully for a recovery and return to growth. Because you have these people on tap, you've maintained the relationship, you've maintained the goodwill, and they're within your employment orbit. That's
it, right? You don't have to go and recruit. And like we often say, the best way to recruit is not to have to, and that is that you have all your good people and they're not leaving you, so you don't have to go and replace them. I mean, if they are there and you've all agreed to a 4-day week and a 20% pay cut for the next 3 months, and that allows you to ride out this storm and get through, and then business starts coming in and things start picking up, you can build back up. It doesn't have to be a complete change. You might go from 4 days to 5 days, and that might see a slight increase in pay. And then you might go back from a 20% wage reduction to 10% to full pay. And you can gradually return people to their terms. And, wrap around that. When you're asking people to sort of do more for less, there is always a bit of a tug, no matter how loyal your people are. So you're still the boss. This is still your company. You're the guy with all the skin in the game. You're going to make the billions of dollars when, Google come and buy, or whatever assumptions people have about you as a business owner. There's always a tug to be when you're asked to do more for less. But there are other ways you can kind of reward people over this time before you can return them to full pay. Keep close to them. Get some sort of counselling program, employee assistance program, EAP, whatever it is, that allows your team to access support and help if they're struggling at this time. Financial help, emotional counselling, that sort of thing. Have events every now and then, a morning tea, a lunch. Don't forget the sort of things that keep a vibe going. And then, build back up to full terms when you can.
So I'm just aware of, we're just running a bit short on time. So shall we just quickly deal with this one, then we can go on to everyone's questions.
Dive into questions. I think that recovery piece, it feels like we've covered a lot of that with the chat, to be honest.
Okay.
Recovering,
Cool. So these are questions that you guys have sent in, and I've just literally cut and paste them in here. So I think, Jason, you said we've sort of grouped them into ones that kind of have a relationship or kind of linked together. And as I said before, if you have any more questions, please do just hit the question box, and we'll answer more as we go along.
Cool. Yeah, well, this first group is fairly straightforward because I feel like we've covered a bit of this. So I'll move quickly through the questions. So that one there about issues to be aware of if changing roles for existing staff to keep them employed. The issues to be aware of are around issues of fairness and disadvantage. And that first category I talked about is around are the changes permanent or temporary? So what I'm assuming on this question is you're talking about permanent changes because this is to keep people employed. So going out and saying I need to cut your pay by 20%. Issues you need to be aware of are things like if the change is more than 20% of a person's job or remuneration or whatever it is, you must present redundancy as an option. So we're proposing to make this change to your job. The result of this change could mean the following. You're no longer doing these duties, you will be doing these duties, your pay will be reduced from this to this, whatever those list of changes are. As these changes are significant, we would also consider redundancy as an alternative or as an outcome of this process. So the employee has a right of refusal. So the first thing they do is they consult with you or they respond to you on whether or not they think your proposed changes are fair and whether they can or cannot accept those changes. And then they consider what that means for them. If you make a decision to go ahead with the changes, the employee has the right to either take the new role on the basis of those changes or to accept redundancy as an outcome. So if you ignore the redundancy piece and you try to force change on people, that will be seen to be unfair. You can't compel someone to take a pay cut. You can't force somebody to take leave if they don't want to take their leave. You know, consultation is required. So that's some of the issues to be aware of around changes. Just you must consult in the same way you previously would have. And then once changes are made, reflect them in an updated employment agreement, please. So you have it in writing and it's signed. So you know what has been agreed and why. Temporary employment change, that goes to my earlier point around, you know, a sort of faster process reflected in letters. Temporary change to working conditions is what we're calling it. And for the period of 4 weeks, you are being paid 80% of your normal earnings. You're staying at home. You will not be required to work, or you will only be required to work X number of hours. All other terms and conditions of your employment remain unchanged. And as soon as we can reinstate you to your full terms, we will do so. And if you can't reinstate to full terms, then you may then revisit a process around restructure and redundancy. The next one there, changes in weekly pattern, i.e. reducing 5 to 4 and how to manage implications that may arise from this. So again, if you're doing this on a permanent basis, you need to consult. A change of a reduction from 5 days to 4 days is a 20% drop in hours, which should have a corresponding 20% drop in income. That's a significant change that could cause disadvantage to an employee. So what you have to do is propose that change, get their input on it, and if they cannot accept that change, but you determine on the balance of probabilities and using all your commercial factors and factoring in their reply that you have to proceed with that change, you may offer them redundancy as an alternative because they have a right of refusal at that point to sort of knock that back. Just to be clear, if you can't afford to pay 5 days and they refuse the 4-day work, doesn't mean that they can therefore force you to pay them 5 days. And that's the purpose of the redundancy outcome. Where it relates to the temporary changes due to COVID, you don't have to put that redundancy outcome on the table because we're making these changes temporarily. And really salary reductions are the same. Is it a temporary reduction or a permanent? And how big is the reduction? You know, am I asking people to just take a 4 or 5% pay cut, or is it a 20 or 30% pay cut? How to manage employees that don't want to return to work but still have the subsidy. This has been a really interesting area for us. I was chatting to a lawyer that we use a bit yesterday, and there's a view here that if you are, again, pre-27th of March, you can stop passing on the subsidy if they don't work or don't want to work. We've been telling our clients that it's actually, if you have the work and you offer the work, and the employee refuses to work for no good reason, that you don't have to pass the subsidy on at that point. You can use that money to pay other people to cover their shift. What we do advise in this situation is you are very clear about why they're not allowed to work. What are the reasons they're giving? Because if they're saying, I'm not prepared to come back to work right now because I am immune compromised, I have a person in my family who is immune compromised, or I'm not satisfied that you have put adequate safety measures in place, you have to respond to that. You can't just ignore those things. You have an obligation under the Health and Safety at Work Act, first and foremost, and then under the regulations around COVID. So you offer your employees a shift. You say, look, you need to come back to work. Here's the working pattern. Here are the safety measures I have in place to protect you. And you know, off we go. And the employee comes back and refuses to work on genuine safety grounds. Then you need to look at the leave subsidy scheme or wage subsidy scheme, and they might be allowed to stay at home and just receive the subsidy. If they just don't want to come back because they like getting 580, 580 and not doing any work, and the prospect now of having to do, you know, because if you look at it on the minimum wage, 580, 580 covers about 29 hours work from memory. So you're now being potentially required to do 29 hours work as a minimum wage employee and get the same amount of money you've been getting for the last 6 weeks for doing nothing. You know, you might be going, oh, mate, I'd rather stay at home, thanks. But you don't get that choice. You have a contractual obligation to attend work. You have a contractual obligation to fulfill the shifts that you've signed up to. So, you know, knocking that back is a breach of your employment contract. So, you know, we're telling our clients that you don't have to pass it on if they are refusing to work for no good reason. Can I make a redundancy 1 month before the wage subsidy payments with their 4-week notice paid by the subsidy? That's an interesting one to answer on a public forum that's being recorded. What I can tell you is I am aware of many businesses who are doing this, which the effect is that when the redundancy rises and the employment is terminated, it's happened at the end of the subsidy period. So the employer is arguing that they've met their obligations under the wage subsidy and not made anybody redundant while they've been receiving it. It's potentially flying pretty close to the line, but this is not an uncommon practice. I'm not quite prepared to go on record and say that you can do this or that you cannot do this, but it is a practice that is happening out there that we have observed. So it allows employers to go, well, I'm running out, I got no revenue and I've got no foreseeable revenue. I need to start my restructure consultation process now. I'm confirming the redundancy. The 4 weeks notice that I'm contractually obliged to give you, I'm offering, but I cannot have you at work due to the lockdown restrictions. So I therefore cannot pay you that notice, but I can continue to pass on the wage subsidy. That's the rationale, and it's not an uncommon practice. Can the recent business loan scheme of $10,000 per business plus $1,800 per full-time employee used to pay legal advice? My understanding of that is that money can be used for anything to run your business. Now, applications open on the 12th of March, next Tuesday. But from what I read from the Grant Robertson press release, is that this is a business loan to help businesses continue trading. I didn't believe, if anyone in the audience has a different view or wants to make a comment, go ahead. But my understanding is this is not like the wage subsidy. You don't have an obligation to pass the loan on to your staff. The loan is interest-free for 1 year, and then I think it goes to 3% or something if you haven't paid it back.
Yeah.
And that can be used to keep your business running. So you can use it for legal advice. You can use it for anything. If anyone has a different view, by all means, jump in. What tools can we use to keep staff working from home, focused on task without micromanaging? I mean, if there was ever an argument to go to the cloud, this is it, you know, and cloud advocates like us, I mean, this is our life. MyHR is cloud software. We live and breathe it. But more than anything now, making use of all of the flexibility that the cloud offers now is the time. If you do not have an online accounting system, if you have any software that requires you to go back to a server in your office and that causes you problems with remote work management, such kind of old legacy systems are probably at their expiry date. So get to the cloud. And in terms of specific tools to keep your team focused and without micromanaging, video conferencing and daily routines. So have a daily, weekly, monthly routine. So you can connect with everybody in a team whip. And it might not be something you would normally do, but a daily connect is enormously powerful. And so it's just, it could be a 15-minute morning. How's everyone going? How's the day looking? Connect with your team. So that's one method. Using technology. So if you look at, say, tools like MyHR, for example, online performance reviews. So you can run normal performance cycles. If you have a monthly performance review check-in around KPIs, you still have that check-in and chat. You just do it over a conference call or a video call, and you align it back to KPIs. If you're adjusting KPIs to allow for COVID, then that's fine. There are all sorts of neat collaboration tools too, like you know, virtual whiteboards and things, so you can still run brainstorming sessions. We use Slack as well. Slack as a conversation tool is really quite powerful, because Slack sort of fulfills the role of your office chat. So we have, you know, and I'm a bit old, so I do find it a little bit messy, but my younger staff, they really dig it. So I'm just on board. But you get all the channels and people just chat. We have everything from a random channel where on Monday there's all the kind of May the 4th be with you, Star Wars Day kind of posts. And then we have a dedicated COVID-19 channel as we get new legal advice or changes. We post stuff there. And the team could just drop stuff in. Hey, I've just had this email from this client asking about such and such. Has anyone come across this before? And there's all sorts of chat going on, you know, from happy birthday to work conversations. And Slack is a really useful tool.
It's also a great way to cut down on email as well, and sort of bring in that collaboration elements. We also, just to add to this, I'd highly recommend Trello if you're sort of looking for more project management tools. Trello is great, and it obviously will integrate with Slack. The Google Suite, so Google Docs, Google Sheets, another fantastic one. And then Microsoft have their own one, which is called Microsoft Teams. And the great thing about most of these, so Slack, Microsoft Teams, and Google all have the video chat as an inbuilt feature. So that'll come with whichever one you use. So you don't sort of have to worry about having to necessarily go out and get yet another piece of technology to add into probably your, you know, already fairly busy technology stack.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. And I think that Google Suite is pretty impressive. You know, for a while there, Google Sheets and Google Docs were really hard to use. They didn't kind of do a lot of things, but they've improved them massively. And I'm old school, so I have a lot of Microsoft, but I've transferred most of my old spreadsheets into Google Sheets because it means we can collaborate. So you're not, again, saving back to a fixed folder and then, you know, having duplicate copies saved. The Google Sheet allows this online collaboration.
And the nice thing is you can also password protect it, so you can specify exactly who you want to give access to a particular sheet or doc. So you don't then have to worry. And they sort of have two layers. You can either say, look, anyone in my organization can have access to it at varying levels. Maybe it's a view or a comment or an edit. And then you can say, look, I'm happy for someone external. So it could be a client and you want to collaborate with them on something, you know, I'm happy for them to view it as well. So, you know, security is always a factor when you're using these sorts of technologies. And, you know, you can feel confident that it is very much the forefront of these tools. And obviously they understand that a lot of the elements that you'll be communicating on are confidential. And so, you know, rest assured that they've taken that into consideration.
Yeah, totally. So I think hopefully that answers that one. There's quite a lot there, but yeah, it comes down to get in the cloud, establish some routines so it's not appearing like you're micromanaging, so you can connect with your team, and use some of the collaborative software tools that are out there would be the three there. Next one, in the interest of time, do I think the wage subsidy will continue? I wish I kind of knew, you know, I wish I had a crystal ball about everything related to lockdown. I don't, my personal view is that no, it won't. In wholesale, I don't think we can afford it as a country. And I think there's been enough, I guess, negative feedback about companies that have perhaps collected it without needing it. I think what might happen is a targeted version of it. If you look back earlier in the week, you can see in one of Jacinda's press conferences, she mentioned a targeted extension of the wage subsidy for the events and entertainment industry. I think she maybe events, hospo and entertainment or something like that. So there may be a targeted extension, but at this stage, I don't know, and unless there's been a news broadcast this morning while we've been online. So my view is it will be targeted, if anything, otherwise, no. The next one, can an employer make selective redundancies during COVID without consultation? No. There's the answer. Quite simply, no, you cannot. And there's two parts to that question, but the one that is an absolute definitive no, no way, no how, is this piece at the end that says without consultation. So you cannot make somebody redundant without consultation, and I have no hesitation in being that clear about it. There is no circumstance. There is perhaps one, and that is force majeure, right? And we've seen this come up a bit, but force majeure is a very special and quite specific term. It exists in contract law beyond employment relationships. Most contracts will have some sort of force majeure clause. and it basically means a total shutdown. So I guess if you are I don't know, a lab, and every one of your team are in ICU with COVID, and you are completely shut down, locked, the army is on your roof, and there is no operation, you've got no flexibility, nothing is going on, doors are bolted closed, act of God kind of stuff. That's that sort of force majeure clause. You can't activate force majeure on a selective basis. I'm going to pick you, but not you. So for most Kiwi employers, you cannot make a redundancy here without consultation.
So that would sort of have to be around you're shutting the company. Everyone has been made redundant.
Yeah, if you look at what it says, it refers to that term "act of God." You know, it's natural disasters, pandemic kind of. So you don't forget, we're not in a pandemic, right? We're in a lockdown to prevent a pandemic. So force majeure is that sort of, yeah, it's when the event has actually happened. So, you know, consultation is absolutely still required, and the government has been unequivocal about it, and you know, I would back that up. Selective redundancies, however, to your point, I mean, absolutely. You don't have to shut your whole team down. You know, you can select where the redundancies fall. You just have to make sure you follow the right consultation process and that your selection criteria are fair and objective. So if it's clear cut, I don't know, we have 10 people working on this particular machine, and the machine is now shut down, and we're mothballing it and we'll never use it again. Those 10 people are potentially all redundant. There is no selection criteria. If you're saying we have 10 sales reps, but we only need 5 in our future world, you consult with all 10, and 5 of them are selected for the new roles, and 5 of them are selected for redundancy or other redeployment options within the business. So that's okay, as long as that selection criteria is fair and objective, and you share it with the people going in. And criteria can include things like last in, first off, performance history, market or industry expertise, and how that might align to your future strategy. Those sorts of things. Fair and objective selection criteria. So the last one there, if an employee do not want to work, if work is available. Yeah, so this goes back to the other question about how can people reasonably refuse? Can people reasonably refuse to work? This takes it a bit further and says, can I terminate this person if they refuse to work? Potentially, yes, you can, if they are refusing to work without giving you a good reason for doing so. You know, they're failing to fulfill their contractual obligations. It's potentially no different. What I would caution you about is these are quite special circumstances. So someone may be refusing to work because they are genuinely kind of upset or anxious about this, and you've done everything you can to demonstrate that you have a safe work environment, that you've done everything you can to meet the regulations, but they're still refusing to come in because they're a bit freaked out about the whole scenario. A termination for that might seem quite harsh. You might go ahead and not give them the wage subsidy so you can use that money to pay someone to cover their shift. But going all out and sacking them, I'd be cautious about that. These are really unique times. And so ordinarily an outright refusal to work without any good reason is justification for a potential termination. But I think at this time that might be seen to be a bit harsh. So I'd caution you on that one.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, I'm going to wrap up because we've just hit the hour mark, and I'm very appreciative of your time, Jason, and obviously thanks everyone for joining us. Good luck out there. Obviously, if you have any more HR questions, feel free to reach out to MyHR online, and just leaves me to thank you, Jason, again so much for your time today.
No, thank you. Happy to do it. It was good to connect.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.